Out of all the different video game genres out there, no other genre has had as much of an impact on the industry as the Japanese role-playing genre. Japanese role-playing games, or JRPGs, like Dragon Quest, Persona, and Xenoblade Chronicles have become a staple in gaming for many years. They feature moving stories, well-written characters, fantastic worlds, and deeply personal messages that have helped change people's lives. But if there's one game that helped to create this trend and helped to exemplify the power of this genre and the power of gaming, it's gotta be Final Fantasy VI. Sporting gorgeous pixel art, a memorable cast, and a moving story about hope and the pursuit of creating a better future, Final Fantasy VI remains one of the founding pillars in all of gaming 30 years on. Hi, my name is Jay, and these are the Gaming Essentials. Final Fantasy is a series of constant evolution. From its early games that used only 16-bit pixels, to the latest HD iterations like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, each game has had a substantial impact on the entire industry. And even though I've already covered Final Fantasy VII here on this series, I want to go back and talk about Final Fantasy VI, another important milestone in the history of games. If you've been around games for a while, you've most likely heard of Final Fantasy, and maybe even Final Fantasy VI. But for those getting into gaming, or if you're due for another playthrough, allow me to talk about this game and how it impacted me, even with this being my first time playing it. Like many gamers today, I too wasn't even born when this game came out. But over time, as I've grown to love the Final Fantasy series and continue to play its many entries, this game has quickly risen to be one of my favorites in the franchise. Even though there are a lot of aspects of this game that may seem old, outdated, or downright frustrating, those same aspects can also be what makes this game unique, innovative, and charming. And if you're a fan of story-driven, role-playing games like The Witcher, Dragon Age, Mass Effect, or even Cyberpunk, you have a lot to thank Final Fantasy VI for. Although this game may be more than 30 years old, there are still a lot of amazing qualities in its approach to combat, exploration, and storytelling that still work and apply to this day. From 1994, developed and published by Squaresoft, and directed by Yoshinori Kitase and Hiroyuki Ito, this is Final Fantasy VI. At a time when games are still coming out of their shell and becoming more than childhood distractions, the Final Fantasy series was pushing the medium forward with games that featured hard-hitting real-world themes. And it's no different here in Final Fantasy VI. In this game, players will encounter characters and stories that touch on themes like prejudice, suicide, childhood abandonment, the apocalypse, tyranny, and the machine-like nature of war, all serving as a reflection of our world. Pretty deep topics for a medium that was supposedly only for quote-unquote young kids. Final Fantasy VI takes place in a fictional world where machines and magic exist together. After a worldwide conflict known as the War of the Magi occurs, all those who use magic supposedly aren't around anymore. But a new evil empire seeking to dig up relics and buried creatures, known as espers, in an attempt to use magic and technology as a means of taking over the world. Final Fantasy VI is a stark departure from the previous installments, jumping from the more traditional notions of fantasy, like knights, mages, and dragons, and implementing more sci-fi elements, like mechs, trains, and steelwork. It's an idea that later iterations, like Final Fantasy VII and X, would later go to town with. That's not surprising considering many of the developers who worked on those games, like Tetsuya Nomura and Yoshinori Kitase, got their big breaks here in Final Fantasy VI. But here in Final Fantasy VI, there are still some elements of traditional fantasy, such as castles, villages, and even court jesters. And speaking of the game's story and its aesthetics, there's a real beauty here in the game's direction, incorporating all its visual and audio elements to tell one cohesive vision. The characters are small and feature simplistic designs, but they still nonetheless reflect the beauty of Yoshitaka Amano's original drawings. They're still extremely colorful and expressive, even when animated in-game. The game even features many breathtaking cinematics, which over the years have been enhanced, but again were ahead of their time then and are even more movie-like now. Scenes like the iconic opening title sequence and Final Fantasy VI's opera scene have all been deeply ingrained in many people's minds, and are moments where players get to sit back and admire the game's beauty. And of course, you can't talk about the game's beauty without talking about Nobuo Uematsu's music. As Terra and the forces of the Gestalt Empire march along a snowy plain, there's a sense of dread, fear, and longing in the game's music, not knowing exactly where the characters are going. And then the iconic opera scene, where Celeste, an ex-military general, pretends to be an opera singer, Celeste sings about a love divided by war. It's a microcosm for one of the game's larger messages. A soldier who's given up on war sings about division and strife tearing her and her lover apart. But it's also a scene depicting the enduring, healing, and unifying power of love, and how even someone as fractured as Celeste can have a second chance at life. All of that is contained within this beautiful piece of music, something very rarely seen in all of gaming.
Were you only here to quiet my fear? Oh, speak, guide me anew.
But these themes of hope and love are only effective in contrast to the dark and depressing elements of Final Fantasy VI. Spoilers for a 30-year-old game, but if you want to play this completely blind, don't worry. Skip ahead to the timestamp and you'll be good to go. I knew going into this about Kefka's quote-unquote victory, and how Kefka actually succeeds in practically destroying the world. But what I didn't realize was just how much death was in this game, and how bleak this game got at times. Cyan, the samurai warrior character of the game, witnesses his entire family and kingdom die before his eyes due to the use of a biological weapon. There are scenes of children losing their parents and becoming orphans. Characters get backstabbed and die and never come back. And the second half of this game is classified as the World of Ruin, where the planet has been reshaped, food and water are hard to come by, and Kefka, the mad clown, rules atop large towers that destroy any and all dissidents. These are all terrible events that occur and that the game doesn't shy away from. But this kind of conflict, trauma, and terrible cataclysm sets the stage for the protagonists of the game to rise, overcome their demons, and fight for a better future they know they might never see. Switching over to the game's combat, this is the section that I think most people might complain is the most quote-unquote outdated. But I think that's an unfair and incomplete assessment, as I think this is the best version of this old style form of gameplay. It features two mechanics that some modern gamers may not enjoy: turn-based combats and random battle encounters. While I can see why certain people may not enjoy these mechanics, I think this is one of the best games that utilize these ideas. Turn-based combat originates from classic Dungeons & Dragons campaigns, where players have to wait their turns before performing actions. And while I wasn't a big fan of this as a kid, I've come to appreciate it and its many nuances. There's only so much you can do in one turn, and you have to decide what takes priority. Do you focus on attacking the enemy, delivering heavy-hitting strikes? Or do you defend and focus on healing your injured party members? Do you attack all the enemies but deal weaker damage in the process? Or do you zero in on one target and do more harm that way? And who you include in your party is also crucial. Each party member has different combat abilities that also reinforce their identities and personalities. And all of that helps to fulfill the role-playing aspect where you customize these characters and become like them. Edgar is brash and bombastic, so therefore he carries a number of large over-the-top weapons and tools that rack up a lot of hit points. Gao is an abandoned feral child that lives in the wilds, so therefore the player can't control him all that much. But he can be a heavy hitter, as he mimics the different monsters you've fought. And let's not forget Sabin, the ultra-powerful martial artist who is so strong he can even suplex a train. Random battle encounters might also be a source of frustration, but once I got used to it, I saw how impactful this design is, especially on how levels are designed. Random battle encounters means players can't dilly-dally when exploring dungeons. It means players have to be smart about their movements and be judicious about where they go. Sure, players can go off exploring the different paths and walkways, but doing so means you'll also be getting into more fights, and your party is not going to withstand every single one. Or you can go straight to the main objective in hopes of keeping everyone alive, but there's always a part of our gamer brains that just nags at us, making us wonder, maybe there's an important treasure chest in that small corner that takes up 0.1% of the map, and that's on the other end of the lava death zone. Even though you know deep down there's nothing there, and you could die in the process, you gotta go check anyway, just to make sure. When it comes to all of the greatest works of art that have been created throughout history, I hope that one day, video games can enter and become part of that conversation. Much like some of the best literature, like Hamlet, The Grapes of Wrath, and Of Mice and Men, video games have the capacity to make us feel, connect, and help us learn to become better humans. And I can't think of a better example of this than Final Fantasy VI. It's a story about a group of broken individuals who overcame their insecurities and in the process inspired us gamers to never let our dreams become just mere fantasy. In my mind, there's no doubt that Final Fantasy VI will eventually get a remake. With games like Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake and Octopath Traveler reviving this retro style of games, it only makes sense that Square Enix would also revive the seminal JRPG that influenced others like it. While gaming has come a long way from its 16 and 32-bit era, I highly recommend going back to experience these classic games. Games like this are why I started this series in the first place, so that others of all ages can learn about gaming history. Indeed, emotionally powerful games with RPG elements like The Witcher and Skyrim wouldn't be here without Final Fantasy VI. Whether you've played it hundreds of times before or picking it up for the first time, Final Fantasy VI opened the way for emotional and heartfelt stories and games with epic clashes that last in our memories forever. That's why Final Fantasy VI is a gaming essential. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, as more videos like this are coming up on their way. And if you're a Final Fantasy fan like me, be sure to leave a comment down below letting me know what other entries you think deserve a spot in this series. New videos come out every week, so I'll come back soon for even more on the best that video games have to offer.